Hi everybody, it's Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
Hello, and today is the number 182 in Sounding the Shadows, and our representative, who writes to tell us when numbers are significant, wrote me something which I found quite amusing. He says, "Dear Adrian and Bridget, found something about 182.
I wonder where he finds these things.
I don't know. It's the Star of Bombay. This is a 182 carat, that's 36.4 grams, I think,
That's huge.
cabochon cut star sapphire from Sri Lanka." And then he adds the comment, obvious in context of him finding something like that. "Otherwise, I'm looking forward to the days getting longer again soon." So
I did tune in with that, perhaps more than the Star of Bombay, because
yes.
today, we had quite deep snow here, didn't we? And it was very beautiful, but quite tricky. Then we had unbelievable level of rain. And then we had a beautiful day. And I went for a short walk with the dog, and the birds were going balmy. They were obviously so happy that all the bad times were over, and today it's rain non-stop. It hasn't got light at all. It's unutterably miserable. So I tune in to wanting the days to be longer, but not if they're raining all the time.
I think it might also be because he won't have to be searching for obscure facts. And
Well, we're very grateful to him.
no, we've always been grateful to him.
So, Adrian, in the Plass house this week, a decision has been made that will affect your life from now on.
I don't know if this is too important to talk about publicly.
Well, I am challenging you to talk about it.
Okay, well, it's about a problem that most people face, and what I'm going to say now will sound to those who don't wear socks very strange, but I recently took the drawer in which our socks were stored. I took out, I tell you, this is the absolute truth. I took out every single sock. I put them in a row on the bed, and I counted them. There were 30 different socks.
We did
there
actually
was
take
not
a picture of them, didn't we?
single pair of socks.
No, we have the proof of that, don't we?
We have a photograph of it, and I promise you it's true. So, this week I thought the time has come to stop fiddling around with minor problems like who goes to heaven and all that sort of stuff, and work the socks out. So what I've done is, and not today rather, about a week and a half ago, I bought 7 pairs of socks.
You did.
Right. And
Identical socks.
they were all black,
Yeah.
which is a bad thing to do because then everyone takes them and they get lost. So every time I used a pair of socks,
Yes.
right, I put them in a special white carrier
You
bag.
do realise this is riveting information.
Well, I'm sorry, but this is important. And then every day, or whenever it was, I put a pair of those socks that I'd used into the white bag.
Yeah.
Last night, I took some other washing I had and that I knew the identity of, which is crucially important. I put it all with the socks in the washing machine. I put the washing machine on, I concentrate, and then I spun it, right, and I watched everything meticulously. When it had spun, I took it out, put it in a white plastic bucket. I took it into the garage and I put it in our new tumble dryer. I tumble dried the contents of the tumble dryer, took out those clothes which are made up of my clothes, including the socks, and then I took them into my bedroom, and you were there at the time.
I was.
And I took separated the socks from the rest of the clothes,
Yes.
and I started to count the pairs.
And
Now, first of all, there were no coloured socks
No,
there,
no.
so far so good. But then I counted 6 pairs,
You did.
and I knew there should be 7. And for a moment, I thought this demon
No.
has gone into the socks.
Can I just say, for a moment, you forgot how many pairs of socks
No,
you
I didn't.
bought.
No,
You
no,
did.
no. I knew it should be 7, but because there were 6, I wanted sanity to prevail. So I told myself it was 6, and then I stood up away from the bed and found I was standing on a 7th pair. So I have successfully shown that if you watch these machines and the people, I have to say, I'm sorry to say, very carefully, you will receive back from the wash the socks that you put in.
I have to tell you, I think a load of people would disagree. There is something about washing machines that steal socks, let alone tumble dryers or washing lines. There is something.
Well,
there is a stealing desire in washing machines.
There is not. You can remain agnostic over this as much as you like, but I am now a believer in the fact that if you are mad enough to go at it like that, you will find the socks will come back.
Yes, well, I'm going to challenge you in a couple of weeks because you've got to keep this going.
I'm going to.
Like a diet going to the gym. Or
I'm going to. And as you are the one who is most likely to say, oh no, I can't be bothered with all that, and steal them.
No, I have nothing to do with it.
Rubbish.
So that's our own internal challenge this week. But the stuff in the world, there is one word, Adrian, that kind of hit me, and it was only used once, which is unusual. But
do you mean in the news?
Yeah, in the news, and it was I heard it on the radio, and it was somebody in America using the term Kettling in terms of what's going on in Gaza.
And what did that mean?
I know that word because I remember it from the
There
past.
is something familiar about it.
Yeah. And so I Googled it, and of course we do know that it's to do with that cordoning off of areas, especially if the police are trying to control a crowd during demonstrations or protests, and they form lines round the crowd and kind of circle and confine the protesters within a limited area. And you found because you love words, you found the metaphor of the kettle interesting, didn't you?
Yeah, well, obviously it's metaphorical, yes.
Well, of course it's metaphorical.
And it's drawing a comparison, apparently, between containing people who are protesting and the way that heat and steam are confined within a domestic kettle. And what it aims to do is to somehow manage crowd movement and keep order. Although there are legal challenges in some countries on the grounds of human rights violations in connection with this. But that's what it's about. And for instance, people say kettling is a last resort and should be used, it's always such pompous words,
I know,
proportionately and in good faith by law enforcement.
And maybe quite often they are. These situations can, we know, be very volatile, very difficult. We live in the northeast now, don't we? And we know that for many families in the northeast, they still have memory, or certainly they have stories passed on to them of the period during the miners' strike, these sort of enforcements were used. But this word, Adrian, was to do with Gaza. And I think it was trying to say that, they're offering, the Israeli government are offering a small window, apparently giving people choice to move if there's going to be an area that's going to be bombarded by bombs or whatever, or ground offensive, that they're told they can move. But in actual fact, there are very few, even in inverted commas, safe places anymore, even in the south of Gaza. So they're being herded into smaller and smaller areas, which are being controlled not by those particular barriers, but certainly by fear and by the possibility that if they move from there, although they've been told they've got a choice to go there, actually there are no safe places.
In fact, the offer of somewhere safe is not an honest one.
No, and I think increasingly people are saying there are no safe places. It reminded me, of a board game, one of those board games where, maybe like chess, but where you move your piece, and you do have a choice to move your piece, but it may well end up in checkmate, and you get to a point where you actually can't move on the board at all. I don't know, I don't know, Adrian, it really impacted me, like I know all over the world people are being impacted by the news of what's going on in Israel and in Gaza. And I think we talked before, didn't we, of our sympathies swinging around.
Yeah.
But I think what struck me was that we have a great luxury here to be able to explore these ideas. And coincidentally, my ears pricked up because the Turner Prize was
before you say
given...
that, in Korea, apparently, North Korea, not that long ago, a young man was executed for listening to the wrong music. People there are being crushed into tiny spaces of perspective and activity, and that is called the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And actually,
you can look at Afghanistan.
It means that you've only got to go
places.
slightly wrong, and you're either dead or imprisoned.
Yeah.
But anyway, go on. Yeah.
Well, no, I was just going to say that my ears pricked up because I'd heard of the Turner Prize before, and coming from the southeast where we lived for 35 years in Sussex, we knew about the Turner Gallery in Eastbourne, but the Turner Prize has finally chosen its winner for 2023, and it's worth just having a look if you can find out about it. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but it's the first transgender winner. Well, that's an old discussion in itself, I know, but it's he would say, exhibition included crowd control barriers made out of twisted railway tracks and a tattered Union Jack bunting. And it's a nod to these divisive periods in British history. And one of the ones that apparently he felt inspired by modern British life and used as a couple of examples the pandemic and austerity. And I thought that is so interesting, going alongside what is happening in the UK with the COVID inquiry.
Which, of course, was on this week. And I watched Boris Johnson answering questions about this, and it really was about the same thing, about the removal of choices about what you're able to do and not do, and where you could go and where you couldn't go. Fortunately, he did admit that the Barnard Castle thing was a disaster.
Except
but we
for
all
the
know
residents of Barnard Castle.
Well, yes, they did.
We've all done very well out of it.
But we all got kettled into our homes during lockdown for our own good, and maybe for our own good and the good of others. But there was a lot of debate about areas like care homes and other places where people stretched, well, as far as one could tell, rather stretched the truth in order to bring about some other aim that they had.
And if you go back to that definition of being kettled, it's not so far off. I mean, we know that in homes where domestic abuse, where abuse of children, where difficulties, we're just nice people in a mess. You know, it was like heat and steam being kettled into those situations. But I don't know. I mean, at the time it felt, and maybe does still feel, like the right thing to have happened, certainly the first lockdown. But I was struck by this choice thing. And it was the first time I can think of in our lives, Adrian, where we were told our only choices were to risk or not to risk, in terms of, you know, if we did go out when we were told not to, we might risk our own health, but also that of others. And also
or being arrested.
Yeah, I was just going to say, a very strict choice of to obey or not to obey the rules. I don't know. Is this something that only applies to society, or only applies to situations where the tensions are running very, very high, as during demonstrations or during situations in the world where emotions and survival are very difficult, or does it apply to any of us, really, even in church or in...
Well, I have thought about this in connection with churches. Unfortunately, I mean, it actually creates a broad access for me to a hobby horse.
Yes, of course,
won't be surprised to hear.
Yeah.
Church Kettling has, I mean, by no means universally, but been carried on, happened for years, where barriers are put around groups of people, so that certain thoughts and attitudes and questions are not what is required within that area that is kettled.
So who's putting the barriers?
Well, on a small level, but important, and we've mentioned it before. We've known people who have been very interested to join a church and become part of it, but have found that being in the groups that discuss things the wrong questions can end up with them being, at best, not exactly ostracized, but sidelined, or actually have to leave by their own decision because there's no freedom of discussion. Those things are expressed as necessary boundaries to the way that we approach life, which is very easy to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, again, as we keep emphasizing, we have the luxury to talk about these things. But, I mean, we had a choice when we were in a situation where we were trying to be fools for Christ, and therefore putting aside any part of our brain that didn't agree with some things that we were reading and being told. We had a choice, but the need to be safe, the need to belong, is a very strong...
It's a very powerful thing. And ironically, it is one of the truly wonderful things that the church can offer, which is to be a place where people can belong without having to change into something else, in theory.
Yeah.
But we do know that, for instance, that before people become Christians, sometimes their differences and their problems are not celebrated but are accepted. And after they make some kind of commitment, life can become very difficult because they're still wrestling with the effects of that. And very difficult.
Do you think there is change? I mean, there's some wonderful initiatives, aren't there? Partly through safeguarding, partly through just new initiatives of wanting people to feel safe, to feel that they can be accepted as they are without change. But I suppose the problem is it's always up to the individuals, and we're all frail, we're all flawed, and so we want people to be happy like we think they should be happy, and free
think,
like we think they should be free.
It is unfortunate that it is often felt that the way to help people is to make them more like us. And the real knot in the problem for Christians revolves around the question, what kind of safety, what kind of freedom are you talking about? It's the most odd thing, I think.
It's one of the things that you really think about a lot, isn't it, Adrian? What do we want?
Well,
what sort of safety
what is freedom with Christianity? I mean, people used to say to me years ago, you Christians, for you, faith is just a bottle of whiskey or a crutch. I mean, I wish.
I don't actually remember the bottle of whiskey. What did that mean?
Well,
a sort of
you
frothy,
intoxicate.
nice...
No, you intoxicate yourself.
Oh, okay.
You get so taken up with it that you're distracted from real life.
And you're offered something that yes, I realise what you're saying, because for me a bottle of whiskey doesn't actually do the same as it would for you.
It doesn't. No.
It doesn't actually
Being with
offer
me does that for you, doesn't it? But,
yes.
But I mean, when you think Jesus actually, in some ways he was a lousy evangelist. I mean, saying to people, don't follow me if you haven't count the cost. You don't count the cost, because people like St. Paul the Apostle, Peter, there are no guarantees of earthly safety for Christians. And there are none. There is no way that it can be said to someone who says, if I become a Christian, will I be safe? And the answer to that is, no, you will not be safe, as the world would count safety.
And do you think that's, I don't mean it's been a lie, but do you think that's been something that has gone a bit wrong with that offer, if you like, putting these barriers around to keep you safe? And you know, that this will keep you safe if you allow these barriers to be put around your thinking,
I'm afraid
your
that what that has happened is that people have put barriers around. You can't allocate blame, but in order to make sure that the easier way of living with this kind of abominable freedom is not available to you. So Paul writes in somewhere or other, I've been beaten, I've been flogged, and for him, and I'm not saying everybody has to go through that, but that was the consequence of his accepting the freedom of being a follower of Jesus.
Okay.
And So the question you might well ask then, and I think would be a perfectly reasonable one, is, so what's in it for us? You know, what?
Yes.
What?
I mean, you became a Christian, then I after you, at a time when what's in it for us is a bit of a prevailing wind in terms of what was offered by politics, by education, I remember saying to my children, and I feel really sad about this, you can be anything you want.
Yeah.
Because we'd come out of the 60s with that rather flimsy, unsubstantiated belief that we could be anything we wanted to be. And I remember our eldest son saying, "You haven't understood, Mum, that isn't the case anymore. There are a lot of, if you like, these boundaries around us." And I wonder whether we were part of that, really, that feeling that it was about what you got, you know, out of a sermon, out of a way of life, out of it would make us rich in a way that represented the world at that time, where capitalism was on the rise, and
Thatcherism was abounding, and it is a strange fact in my life now. I mean, that the realization that I can't, and I think I did once when I was young. You can't say I'm going to be okay because I'm a Christian. But I'm asking, you know, I say what's in it for us as though it's flippant. It isn't really. There is something in it that is so inexpressibly, unbelievably wantable but it has no place in the world that seems to be covered by words that we use.
No, the nearest I can come to it, Adrian, is an initiative in the Church of Scotland, which was to create church without walls.
Yeah.
Church without these. And I was just thinking about, you know, all the way through the Old Testament, God does bang on about shepherds not looking after their sheep. And the good shepherd does not confine his sheep all the time. He leads them to rich pastures to find something new and exciting and the best place for them, and confines them at night to keep them safe. We need to work out what our boundaries
I don't know
are.
even what that means.
Well, I sort of
I really
do.
don't.
I think what I mean is that there are times when we do need protection. And if it is for our protection, then there are times when we do need to be held, especially if we've come, from a really difficult situation in our lives, or through addiction, or through all sorts of things that have happened to us. For a period, we do need to be penned a little bit.
You might need people to really help you with that.
But even that's
for that
only
reason, you might need to be contained.
Yeah, for when the wolves are out and the lions might devour you. But that was only a little bit of what being a shepherd was all about.
But in the end, you, like Peter, you sit on the shore of the lake, and Jesus says to you, "Do you love me?" He says, "Yes, you know I do."
I know.
He says again, "Do you love me?"
Push in a bit more.
"You know I do. Do you love me?" And then he gets a bit cross and says, "You know I do," and maybe weeps even. And then he says, "Feed my sheep." And at that point, he knows, maybe Peter knows, that there is no promise of safety in this world.
No safe pen for him.
No.
If he really cares about the sheep.
No, but in the most important way possible, ultimately, the bottom line, he is more safe than you can possibly imagine. And these concepts are almost inaccessible unless you have felt some closeness to the person who has set it up. It doesn't get any easier to understand.
No, we'd love to hear from people about this, because we are just working through these things.
Absolutely. Yeah, more so than ever. Yeah.
And we'll speak to you next week.
Yes, we will.
Bye.
Goodbye. Don't forget the socks. Very important.
Oh, come